Good morning. How you guys doing? I apologize again for missing last Monday morning's lesson in Amos. I was on a 24-hour call with my job, and just day and night was consumed. My time was consumed. I did study, but I just couldn't deliver a message. I don't like to break momentum because it kind of develops from that a disinterested spirit in some. So I like to keep it continually coming. Every Monday morning to start off the week, a new lesson in Amos. So the momentum's back, and we're going to get going on with it. And this morning we're going to do Amos chapter 1, verses 4 through 5. But as we move along here in Amos, the last lesson we did in verse 3, we talked about the 3 transgressions of Damascus and for 4. And we talked a little on and went over the repetitive phrasing Amos is using. And we'll go on to use for several more verses to come. And that introductory phrase, for 3 transgressions and for 4 3 transgressions of a particular sin and for 4 more. 3 transgressions plus 4 more transgressions equals 7. 7 is a complete number in Scripture. It's interesting to ponder the thought of that. It just is. There's a lot of 7s. There are 7 trumpets. We went over there were 7 pairs of clean animals and so on. There are many 7s of something in the Bible. Many pairs of 7s of something in the Bible. So Amos, in poetic literary formula, is in repetition, saying, for the complete number of transgressions, for the complete number of sins of these cities and nations, there are more. So let's start off here in verse 3 and go into verses 4 and 5. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron. But I will send a fire into the house of Hazael, which shall devour the palaces of Ben-hadad. I will break also the bar of Damascus, and cut off the inhabitant from the plain of Avon, and him that holdeth the scepter from the house of Eden. And the people of Syria shall go into captivity unto Kir, saith the Lord. That authenticates it right there. God speaking through the minor prophet Amos, saith the Lord. So in the last lesson, we discussed the transgressions of Damascus. And in the last previous lesson in Amos chapter 1, verse 3, we went over an explanation for the metaphor Amos used with the threshing of implements of iron upon Gilead. So in verse 4 here, God says through Amos, I will send a fire into the house of Hazael. Hazael, he is the king of Syria, a king of Syria. And this fire will devour the palaces. It will devour the strongholds of Ben-hadad. Ben-hadad was another king of Syria. God's judgments throughout the Old Testament are literally and figuratively affiliated with fire. Actual material fire and metaphorically. Fire as in war. Fire as in pestilence. Fire as in famine. Fire as in utter ruin, as would result from an inferno of fire, turning material things, into ash. So the prophet Jeremiah, he used similar language in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 27. And I will, and this is God speaking through Jeremiah, and I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall consume the palaces of Ben-hadad. Ben-hadad was a popular name for a king in the Old Testament ancient era of time, just like the name Pharaoh. Pharaoh was a popular name for a king in Egypt. So this verse 4, I will send a fire into the house of Hazael, the king of Syria, which shall devour the palaces of Ben-hadad. Ben-hadad, palaces, well, they were named after previous kings out of popularity. So in the ancient East, fire was a popular weapon of attack to destroy villages. Fire destroyed markets, property of all sorts, synagogues, grazing lands. God used armies. God would pull the worst of the worst out from their garrison to do and accomplish his will in scourging and judging the nations of his people. He'd use fire. So if you can think back to Sodom and Gomorrah, fire came down from heaven. And in other words, the judgment of fire came down in a particular way per God's request. Everything that grew on the ground, all the cities, all the inhabitants in the valleys, they were overthrown. The grand cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were judged with arson. And Lot's wife, well, some Jewish scholars say her name was Edith. The Bible's really not clear on that. But anyhow, Lot's wife stuck her nose where it didn't belong, not minding the business of the task at hand, and looked back, just had to take a peek back, and became a pillar of salt. Kind of like we're nosy when we go down the interstate and you see 5 ambulances and a couple cars flipped on the roof. We almost hit the car in front of us, just looking back, just gotta see what's going on, gotta be nosy. I've stuck my nose in there before. I'm guilty of it too, but you can read the account of this Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 19. So to capture an image of God sending fire into the house, the king Hazael, and consuming this fire, the palaces of Ben-Hadad, you can research the works of survey from reputable archaeologists. And there are recordings in detail that the original city of Damascus and its location is just not there. The original is just not there. In Damascus, it's claimed to be the oldest city in the entire world. And it has changed locations a few times. It has burned a few times. And this reference in Amos 1:4 is just one of those occasions. Isaiah himself prophesied that original plot of earth Damascus resided on would be destroyed, alienated. The burden of Damascus in Isaiah 17:1, he says, "Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap." I hope this verse in Isaiah right here will be a ruinous heap. I hope that verse can put to rest the false prophetic future event that these pickpocket pimp pastors spew, that every time there's a war in the Middle East, Damascus will be destroyed. Fulfilling Bible prophecy. Damascus is old news. There's nothing to see there. So the next time we go to war in the East, you'll hear your pastors on YouTube and everywhere else saying, Damascus will be destroyed, fulfilling Bible prophecy. All right. So let's move on to verse 5, beginning with verse 4. "But I will send a fire into the house of Hazael, which shall devour the strongholds, the palaces of Ben-Hadad. I will break also the bar of Damascus, and cut off the inhabitant from the plain of Avon, and him that holdeth the scepter from the house of Eden. And the people of Syria shall go into captivity under Kir, saith the Lord." The gate bar of Damascus will be broke off. The gate bar, well, just imagine like city gates. Cities were fortified, the stronger cities with iron instead of wood, because wrought iron could not be easily compromised with fire, started by a particular enemy. The wooden fortified cities, they could be burned down and could be entered quickly. The dwelling places, they could be burned. But the iron or bronze gates would have to be broken. Maybe tying cordage to the bars. And taking that cordage that's tied to the bars and maybe tying it to implements that are mounted on a team of oxen. Something like that. So the God through Amos says, "I will break the bar of Damascus." This, as well as literal fortified protection of massive iron bars, could be as strong as iron, such as maybe a frontline squad, like a frontline squad of a military defense. And to breach the iron gates, this front line, these warriors would have to be defeated and penetrated first to dismember the barred gate into the Damascus city. That's another way of looking at it. Anyhow, the gate bar of Damascus will be broke. I will break also the bar of Damascus and cut off the inhabitant from the plain of Avon. So God is giving the explanation of going and opening the gate bars so the enemies can come in and destroy Damascus. And the inhabitants will be cut off from the plain of Avon. Israel, you will notice throughout the scripture, Israel would choose the high places, the mounts, to worship. And the Syrians, they preferred the valleys. The Syrians preferred the plains to worship their gods and practice their idolatry. So the plain of Avon, from what I could gather, was a type of that Las Vegas town everybody's so familiar with, Sin City. The plain of Avon was popular, a refuge of comfort, habitable with conveniences. So much so that it was restorable after its destruction, because the Romans made attempts to colonize the plain of Avon. So the inhabitants from the plain of Avon will be cut off, and him that holdeth the scepter from the house of Eden. Well, this scepter here, this ruling power, this scepter, this emblem of authority of kings, the kings of Syria, this royal dignity will be of no protection, no security for them, while they are gluttons and while they swell up in the house of Eden. These royal seats in Eden, their summer houses, these suites in Eden will be destroyed, laid waste, no protection, and there's no potentate or credentials of a king that can protect them. And the people of Syria shall go into captivity unto Kir, saith the Lord. Well, the tail end of verse 5 here, and the people of Syria shall go into captivity unto Kir, saith the Lord. The tail end of this verse 5 gives much understanding to the lesson we did in Amos chapter 1, verse 3. Just a couple weeks ago, doesn't it? Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. Why will God not turn away the punishment of Syria, Damascus? Because they have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron. This is judgment time for Damascus, judgment time for Syria. They are being taken captive by the Assyrians for the cruelty towards humanity, the inhabitants of Gilead. Now, Kir, the land of Kir, there's a couple Kirs, but this one is the province in the Assyrian Empire. The Syrians were taken into captivity, taken into custody, into that barren, mountainous country about 50 years. 50 years after this was foretold by Amos. In 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 9, it says, And the kings of Assyria marched up against Damascus and took it, carrying its people captive to Kir, the Kir of Media. So there's just so much extracurricular historical writings regarding biblical history that you just can't get off in the weeds and get your leg caught in the groundhog hole. And there's a lot of geography too in it. So I'm just hitting the basics here for understanding. And it is said that Sir Rawlinson found recorded on ancient found writings that Tiglath-Pileser, a king of Assyria, wrote, I entered the gate of his city, his chief officers alive. I took and on stakes I caused to lift them up.